So as I mentioned, this is the Stormwater Program and Fee Update. It's August 18th, 2020. A brief overview of the presentation. So talk about the stormwater utility and program, the current system needs, fee evaluation overview, some examples of non-residential fees, and the next steps, and then at the end we'll address any questions or comments. So here's a brief timeline of the stormwater program for the city of Hendersonville. So the city, was incorporated in 1847. So from 1847 to 2007, drainage improvements were basically made as needed as the city grew, and a lot of those improvements were made early on in the history of the city. So we have a lot of older infrastructure, particularly in the west side of town and some of the places where we have early development. In 2007, the city became permitted under phase 2 of the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System program, which is part of the Clean Water Act administered by the Environmental Protection Agency. And as part of that permitting, the city council adopted a stormwater ordinance, which is what established our current stormwater regulations. From 2007 to 2016, that stormwater permit and associated program were managed by the engineering department. In 2016, a stormwater enterprise fund was created at a flat rate of $2 per customer. A stormwater specialist position was added and some program development began. Then from 2016, 2017, and 2018, as most people might know, we had the wettest year on record in 2018 with over 100 inches of rain for the year, which is almost double the annual rainfall for the region. And that started to highlight some issues with infrastructure failure tied to stormwater. We noticed also, some increased localized flooding. In 2018, we increased the fee from $2 to $3, the stormwater fee. That was to pay for the Wash Creek master plan. As I mentioned, that's one of the oldest areas of development, so it has a lot of the oldest pieces of infrastructure, and that was kind of the catalyst for where we're at today. Also in 2018, important to note is that the state Department of Environmental Quality, their stormwater program went through an overhaul, and they began the process of auditing all the local municipality stormwater programs. And between 2018 and 2020, the audits have been ongoing at the state level, and we just recently council recently voted to increase the stormwater fee from $3 to $5 as part of the stormwater utility rate study, which we will talk about tonight during this presentation. So what is a stormwater utility? The stormwater utility is a dedicated source of revenue that's provided by user fees, and it's used to pay for long-term compliance with the state and federal requirements. It's also used to pay for maintenance and expansion of the city's stormwater system infrastructure. And that system consists of many miles of natural and man-made drainage infrastructure that includes inlets, channels, pipes, and culverts, as well as the natural system, which streams are included in that. And all of that is designed to convey precipitation away from property off streets to protect private property, roadways, and at the end, the environment. And so the benefit of a dedicated utility is that it provides a critical tool and a dedicated source of funding to pay for the replacement of aging infrastructure. And it also allows the city to finance large capital projects tied to stormwater. Otherwise, that revenue would have to be pulled from, say, the general fund or another fund that is not directly tied to stormwater. And the fees are established to equitably share the cost of public infrastructure and its benefit to private property. As we just mentioned, a portion of those fees goes to meet state and federal requirements. And those requirements are set forth again by the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Act, which is part of the Clean Water Act. And we are permitted under phase 2 of that program. And basically the goal of that program is to address non-point source pollution and stormwater runoff. So currently today in the United States, stormwater runoff is the #1 or one of the top sources of pollution to surface water in the country. So again, the city was federally designated as a phase 2 community in 2007 and began operating a stormwater management program in 2007, the same year that we drafted the city, the stormwater ordinance into the city's code of ordinances. We do have a separate enterprise fund, and that was established in 2016. And if you'd like more information on the stormwater program that then will be provided in this presentation, we have a lot of great information on the website. So speaking more on the management requirements, so this is the program management requirements of the phase 2 permit. The city all these are aimed at maintaining and improving water quality via managing stormwater runoff. So those include public outreach and education, public involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination, which means identifying places where there could be cross connections from the sewer to the storm sewer, or where there might be somebody unknowingly or knowingly discharging pollutants into a storm drain, storm water body, or directly into a stream or river. There's construction site runoff control, post-construction runoff control, which most people will be familiar with that as any type of stormwater pond or retention facility that would be associated with the development. And then finally, pollution prevention and good housekeeping, which those are all the programs and things that the city has implemented at its own facilities and with its own staff to make sure that city facilities and the different operations around the city are not generating polluted stormwater runoff. It's important to note, though, that beyond all of these program requirements, that does not included in these program requirements is the need to upgrade, replace, and improve the stormwater infrastructure that is in the city. And so what are some of those existing infrastructure needs? So here you'll see several examples from around the city. There's a number of homeowners that live with a creek or stream directly abutting their property, and a lot of them probably experienced some type of stream bank erosion, and that is a direct result of increased stormwater flows. Failing infrastructure, you can see, the other two pictures, those are examples of older infrastructure, and it's obviously failing and will need to be replaced at some point in the future. And we also have a lot of situations where infrastructure was put in without the city knowing or being involved. This is a great example of that. You have a house that's built directly over the convergence of two main drainage trunk lines in the city. So basically, this is the basement of a house. It's open, but you can see where these two large trunk lines converge and discharge a large amount of stormwater directly under somebody's private residence. In the next picture, this is a picture of our section of our stormwater utility map, which shows the infrastructure in the city. And as you can see here, there are lots of, this is just one example where drainage infrastructure is moving from the public right-of-way through private property and back onto public right-of-way. And so that creates some difficult issues when determining how to maintain it, who's going to maintain it, and how those projects are funded. Here, the very familiar scene around Hendersonville lately, some localized flooding, intersections and things like that become impassable. It is important to note that the city of Hendersonville and the majority of Henderson County, it's a low-lying wet area, so there is a lot of development that's happened in the floodplain. So while some smaller flooding issues could potentially be addressed with improvements to stormwater infrastructure, not every flooding issue in the city is something that can be addressed by improved or increased stormwater infrastructure. Okay, so we've seen all the infrastructure, not all of it, but we've seen some examples of the infrastructure in the city. And so what happens when we, kind of take a hands-off approach and don't have any type of plan to maintain or repair this infrastructure? Here's a picture of a pipe within the city. If you can tell, it's in pretty bad shape. It's pretty old. So if this pipe is just left and there's no plan to address it, it could very easily become a situation like this, where you have a very large sinkhole open up. If this is on private property, that property basically becomes unusable. If it's on a public street, that street would obviously not be passable. And if, unfortunately, some vehicle or piece of infrastructure happened to be in the vicinity of this sinkhole, it would be lost. Here's some examples from a community very close by. Asheville, they have been experiencing a lot of issues with stormwater related sinkholes, especially in the last few years. Here's a big one. This is a very large sinkhole in the north part of Asheville, but you can see it's in a parking lot and it's in a commercial business parking lot. So this business cannot operate due to the presence of the sinkhole, and that is directly tied to old aging infrastructure that was not replaced. So this brings us to determining what the city's level of service is going to be as it pertains to stormwater. So what stance is the city going to take in upgrading, improving, and maintaining the existing stormwater infrastructure? And what we call that is a level of service. So currently, the level of service for the city of Hendersonville as it pertains to stormwater is that we have partial proactive planning, and we are beginning to develop capital improvement needs. So we have studied one sub-watershed, which is the Wash Creek watershed, the western part of west of downtown. And I've identified several projects as a result of that plan. Currently, the repair and replacement plan is if something breaks, we're going to fix it, or a reactive operation. We are proactive in our permit compliance. We do maintain the 5 of the 6 measures, and the county is responsible for performing one of those measures. That's the construction inspection or construction runoff control. So active construction sites. We handle finished construction development. Again, a responsive, when it comes to operation and maintenance of the system, it's a responsive. If a catch basin gets clogged up and somebody calls in, we'll come clean it out. If a sinkhole opens up, we'll come out and we'll assess it. And if it is, tied to city right of way, we'll repair it. So those are both reactive and responsive program management approaches. And this just recently went up to a $5 per month fee. And even at that $5 per month, that does not generate enough revenue to maintain even this current level of service. So based on this level of service, we took that and applied it to a level of service matrix. And if you look at this matrix, you'll see there's 5 levels or grades of the level of service. You have different categories. So you have program management activities, you have permit compliance, you have capital improvements projects. So if we're looking at the current level of service that the city has, when we began the program and began the stormwater utility study, there was currently at that time no future planning for improving or upgrading the system. There was no real CIP plan, implementation, or capability. So there was no revenue to fund large capital improvement projects. We did have proactive permit compliance. We're doing pretty good with our permit, those 6 minimum control measures. We are set for an audit from the state early next year, so they will hopefully agree with that. And then we also have operation and maintenance program activities. So that ranges from fully preventative all the way to less than full response. So if there's a complaint, we will respond to that issue, and that's responsive only. You know, we're lacking on the ability to conduct routine inspections of the system, and by not being able to conduct routine inspections, we can't plan for improvements based on the end of life of that piece of infrastructure. And then over here for capital improvements projects, as I mentioned, there is currently no long-term plan, so 75 years or more. So what does that put us on this level of service matrix? The current level of service would be a D, or if you know, maybe a C minus, but definitely not a good level for the level of service. And so what was done as part of the stormwater utility study is City Council was asked to take a look at this level of service matrix and basically pick what level of service they felt most comfortable with providing to as part of the stormwater program and part of the stormwater utility. And what they decided on was a level B minus to C plus. So proactive planning and systemic CIP implementation. So having a plan for going out and replacing and repairing aging infrastructure, not just waiting for it to fail, maintaining our permit compliance, increasing our operation and maintenance activities to a more of a mixture of routine and inspection based operation and maintenance. So inspecting the infrastructure that's out there and planning, using those inspections to plan for future improvements, and then having a 20 to 40 year capital improvements plan for all of the stormwater infrastructure that is currently in the city, that's within city right of way. So based on that level of service, the staff was asked to, so we took that level of service and looked at what it would cost to implement the different features and factors of the program to reach that level B, C level of service. And so to do that, we reevaluated what the current rate structure was and what amount of revenue would need to be generated in order to meet those level of service requirements that City Council directed us towards. So the challenge that we have is, one, there are increasing federal and state requirements for the stormwater program to improve and maintain water quality, as well as a long list of backlog and ongoing maintenance and capital improvements projects. As I mentioned earlier, you know, basically from the inception of the city and then, or incorporation of the city in the 1840s until recently, you know, infrastructure has gone in, but there hasn't really been a plan to go back and replace that infrastructure. So we have pipes and parts of the network that are well over 100 years old, 70, 80 years old. And these pieces of infrastructure do have a useful lifespan. And a lot of that infrastructure is reaching the end of that. And in addition, with the growth of the city that we've experienced, a lot of these pieces of infrastructure are now becoming undersized and need to be addressed for capacity issues. So with the previous flat rate of $3, that generated about $325,000 annually. With the new $5 flat fee, that number is closer to $500,000. And based on the level BC level of service, it was approximated that we would need $1.4 million annually to address the city's stormwater needs at that level of service. So even at the $5 flat rate for everybody, we're, you know, less than half of the revenue that's required to meet that level of service. So some assumptions of the level B and C, basically where we want to get to, are that we would have a proactive management and replacement of prioritized system assets. So what that means is we will go out and identify and inventory the system, and then based on what we find, a conditions assessment of the system as it is now, we can prioritize over the next 10 years what pieces of infrastructure most need to be replaced based on the likelihood of failure, the consequence of failure, is it going to, does it run through a field somewhere, or does it run directly under someone's house? Does it run down a main road in the city? And if it fails, how's that going to impact those different factors? And we also looked at how would we address the issues once we've identified them. So, we don't have the personnel in-house to send out and start addressing all of these stormwater issues. So what that looks like is a combination of contracted services, so having contractors do the stormwater improvements, and also adding a few additional personnel in-house to help with program management, project management. So this is 1 to 2 new full-time employees. And basically, in order to get to that 1.4 million, we would need to implement a $5 rate for residential customers, and then an ERU, or equivalent residential rate, for our non-residential customers. So that's commercial businesses, industrial, nonprofits, government. All of those are considered non-residential customers. And basically, what the equivalent residential unit does is it looks at the amount of impervious surface that is on an average residential size lot. And that number happens to be 3,000 square feet in the city of Hendersonville. We have some examples of that further on in the presentation. And it applies that unit to non-residential parcels. And then the fee is established based on that value. So the fee evaluation overview, after we worked with our consultant to figure out what the level of service that City Council desired was, what that was going to cost, and how we would generate that revenue. Throughout this whole process, we've been working very closely with City Council. We presented at workshops to them in January, at council meetings in March and April. And the information that they received were on the existing revenues and expenditures, the financial needs that are associated with the various levels of service and long-term compliance. That's how we came to the level BC level of service. Scenarios for fee increase schedules and structures, including caps and floors. So if we do implement a utility fee and a new utility structure, how does that structure want to be set up? And when you do put that structure in place, what's the highest fee somebody would be paying on a monthly basis, and what's the lowest fee somebody would be paying on a monthly basis? Currently, we're operating under the assumptions that the lowest fee would be the flat $5 rate, and the cap would be $1,500 for the largest customers. And that the rates for the non-residential users are charged on an ERU structure, and I'll explain the ERU structure a little bit better in a couple slides. And then also that a credit program be developed for non-residential customers that have stormwater control measures in place, so that they are controlling the stormwater from their site before it enters into the city system. So what is an ERU or an equivalent residential unit? So again, basically the equivalent residential unit is the average area of impervious surface on a single family residential parcel in the city. And you can take that unit, 3,000 square feet, and apply it to a non-residential parcel. So the non-residential user would pay a multiple of the base residential unit of impervious surface. That means, well, the benefit of the ERU structure is that it's the most equitable method to charge, since it's based on the amount of impervious surface, or surface that does not infiltrate water, on each individual property. It's the most common non-residential stormwater fee structure in North Carolina. There's over 100 separate municipalities that charge stormwater utility fees, and over 80% of them have a ERU structure in place. And those fees for residences for residential fees range from $2 to $6. So at $5, we are right in line with what the rest of the state is at. So if you wanted to compare the runoff from a residential parcel to your average non-residential parcel, if we took the rain event that happened on August 13th in Hendersonville, a local rain gauge measured 1.53 inches of rain. So the amount of runoff that was coming from your average home, your single family residence, was about 3,000 gallons. The average amount of runoff that was coming from a non-residential parcel, say a gas station or a convenience store, or a smaller, average size non-residential parcel, that's almost tenfold. So 30,000 gallons of water would be discharged from that one rain event. Now, if you take that to the largest customer in the city, you're looking at over 1 million gallons of water from one rain event. And so this is why the ERU structure is popular, because it is tied directly to the amount of water that is being generated by the property and then discharged into the city system or into the stormwater system. So to provide an example, if the charge is based upon the comparison of an impervious surface to the average residential impervious surface, 3,000 square feet. So if you have property owner A, non-residential property owner, has 9,000 square feet of impervious surface on their property, that is equivalent to 3 times the residential rate, or the ERU. So that property owner would pay 3 times the residential fee. If the residential fee is $5, property owner pays a $15 monthly fee. So we also wanted to make it clear that both the city and the county would be paying these fees as well. And under the $5 rate, the county would be responsible for about $4,000 a month in stormwater fees, and the city would be responsible for just over $1,600 a month in stormwater fees. With the current assumption that we would implement a cap, both of these entities would be paying $1,500 a month, not $4,000 or $1,600. And that cap would be also applied to all other non-residential customers. So one other thing that we've discussed that we would like to implement, should the utility and the new fee structure go into place and we receive the funding necessary to fund the program fully, is a drainage assistance program. So currently there is a moratorium on any work outside of the city right of way. So unless there is an easement on the pipe or piece of infrastructure, or the piece of infrastructure is inside the city right of way, so associated with a city street or other piece of city infrastructure, if it's not one of those two situations, we do not have the funding or the jurisdiction without an easement to conduct any work on those pieces of infrastructure. And if you remember earlier on, we have a lot of pieces of infrastructure that were put in a long time ago that, multiple property owners added to the pieces of infrastructure. So you have a mishmash of materials and sizes, and older and newer pieces of infrastructure that aren't always put in based on what the need or what the capacity of the pipe, that's not taken into consideration. So as part of that program, basically the goal would be to aid private property owners with drainage issues on a case-by-case basis. And that program would involve cost sharing. So the city and the property owner would work together to fund the repair or replacement of that infrastructure. And it would also involve easements. So an easement would be dedicated over to the city that says that, the city has the right to come in and repair and maintain that pipe once it's been repaired or replaced. And secondly, we would like to look at establishing a stormwater advisory board comprised of different stakeholders in the community. And the goal of this advisory board would be to provide input on what the community's expectations and goals are for the stormwater program, because ultimately the program is for the benefit of the community. So does the community want the program to be aimed at reducing flooding, improving water quality, increasing the amount of green infrastructure in the city, those types of things. They would also potentially provide input on CIP development. So kind of look at potential large CIP projects and and provide input on what they feel like is the most important. Review the annual stormwater plan, so what the program is doing, what our current procedures are, and make recommendations on improving those policies and improving those procedures, and review new and old policies and provide recommendations. So provide ordinance update recommendations, provide input on the credit and appeals process, provide input on any off right-of-way drainage assistance program, potentially future land use and development plans. All of those, would be of interest and would be important for the Stormwater Advisory Board to weigh in on. So where are we with the implementation of the stormwater utility? We have increased the base residential rate to $5. We've actually just increased the base rate to $5. So all customers, residential and non-residential, are currently paying a $5 flat fee. We have done outreach to the 30 largest non-residential fee payers. That was done in June of 2020. Public education and input is ongoing. We are working on revising ordinances, developing an appeals and credit program, looking at drainage assistance program, and looking at establishing other parts of the program, such as the Stormwater Advisory Board. And then the final part of this process would be to implement the ERU structure for non-residential properties. So as I mentioned earlier, currently everyone is paying a flat $5 fee. So if we go back to this slide here, your average residential property owner pays $5. Your average non-residential property owner is also paying $5, even though they're discharging 10 times more water. And your largest non-residential property owner is also paying that flat $5 fee while they're discharging over 1 million gallons into the stormwater system. So that is the last step, is to implement the ERU structure for the non-residential properties and create a more equitable way to generate revenue for the stormwater utility program. And with that, I'll take any questions. I think we have